A night of shadows. The city streets buzzed with the usual hum of life as the evening began to set in. Tall buildings cast long shadows over the sidewalks, and people hurried about their business. Among them was Emily Carter, a beautiful young black woman with a confident stride. She walked through the heart of the city, relishing the warmth of the day fading into a cool evening breeze. Emily loved these moments of peace, strolling alone and soaking in the sights and sounds of the bustling urban landscape. Little did she know, her tranquil evening was about to take a dark turn. As Emily made her way down the sidewalk, she noticed a police officer standing by his patrol car, watching her intently. His gaze lingered on her longer than she liked, causing an unease to creep up her spine. She brushed it off, trying to ignore the prickling sensation of discomfort. However, as she passed him, he stepped forward, blocking her path. "Hey, miss, can I talk to you for a second?" he asked, a forced smile plastered on his face. Emily paused, feeling a wave of discomfort wash over her. The officer's demeanor was friendly on the surface, but there was something about the way he looked at her that made her skin crawl. She didn't want to engage, but she also knew better than to be outright dismissive of a police officer. Taking a deep breath, she smiled politely. "I'm sorry, officer, but I'm in a hurry," she replied, trying to keep her tone neutral. The officer, whose name tag read Jason, narrowed his eyes slightly, his smile fading as his eyes raked over her. "Come on, I'm just trying to be friendly. What's the rush?" he pressed, stepping closer and invading her personal space. Emily's discomfort deepened. She could sense his insistence, but she kept her composure. "I appreciate it, but I really have to go," she repeated, her voice firm but polite. Jason's expression hardened, the friendly facade slipping away entirely. He wasn't used to being rejected, especially not by someone like her. Taking another step forward, his hand brushed against the baton on his belt. "Are you sure you want to walk away from me like that?" His tone was no longer friendly, it was threatening. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, fear coiling in her stomach as she realized this situation was taking a dangerous turn. She took a small step back, trying to put some distance between them. "I'm not looking for any trouble," she said, her voice shaking just slightly. But it was too late. Jason's face twisted in anger, his temper flaring at her resistance. Without warning, he swung his hand across her face. The force of the blow sent her stumbling back, pain shooting through her cheek as she clutched her face in shock. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she gasped, disbelief and fear mingling in her voice. Jason's eyes gleamed with a dangerous light as he reached for his radio. "We've got a suspect resisting arrest here," he said into the device, his voice cold and authoritative. "Send backup." Emily's heart raced. This couldn't be happening. She hadn't done anything wrong, and now she was being treated like a criminal. Desperately, she looked around for help, but the few passers-by who had been nearby hurried away or were too afraid to intervene. Within minutes, 2 more police officers arrived, their faces stern and emotionless. Jason pointed at Emily, his demeanor dripping with disdain. "She's resisting arrest," he said, his voice filled with venom. Before she could protest, the officers moved in. One of them grabbed her arm roughly, twisting it behind her back, while the other shoved her to the ground. Emily screamed in pain as her body hit the cold, hard pavement. They didn't care about her cries for mercy or the fact that she hadn't done anything wrong. To them, she was nothing but a target. "Stop, please, I haven't done anything," Emily pleaded, her voice breaking as tears streamed down her face. But her cries fell on deaf ears. Jason watched with a smirk as his fellow officers restrained her, enjoying the power he held over her in that moment. He crouched down next to her, leaning in close so only she could hear him. "You should have just been nice, sweetheart," he whispered darkly. "Now look at the mess you've made." Emily's heart raced as she struggled to breathe. The weight of the officers pressing her down into the ground was suffocating. The pain in her body was nothing compared to the terror she felt. This was a nightmare, and she had no way to wake up from it. As they roughly pulled her to her feet, her arms twisted painfully behind her back, Jason stepped forward again, gripping her chin tightly and forcing her to look up at him. "You're under arrest for resisting a police officer," he sneered. "And trust me, you're going to regret crossing me." The officers shoved her into the back of the police car, slamming the door behind her. Emily was left alone in the cold, dark interior of the vehicle, her mind racing. This wasn't just an arrest. It was an assault on her dignity, her rights, and her very existence. As the car sped away toward the police station, Emily's mind spun with fear and disbelief. What had she done to deserve this? She was just trying to live her life, and now she was being treated like a criminal. The thought of what awaited her at the station made her stomach turn. She could only pray that someone, somehow, would help her. But for now, she was completely at their mercy. The harsh fluorescent lights of the police station flickered above as Emily was dragged through the entrance, her wrists tightly cuffed behind her back. The cold metal bit into her skin, and her entire body ached from the brutal force the officers had used against her. Fear pulsed through her veins, but she knew pleading would do no good. These men weren't interested in her innocence. They had already decided she was guilty of something. Anything. And now they were going to make her pay. Jason walked behind her, a cruel smirk playing on his lips, his eyes glinting with sick satisfaction, knowing full well that no one in this place would question his actions. They reached a small, windowless interrogation room at the far end of the station. The walls were bare, the air stifling. One of the officers pushed her roughly into a chair, securing her arms to the back of it. Her hands throbbed from the tight cuffs, and her mind raced as she tried to process what was happening. Jason closed the door behind him, and Emily's heart sank. She was trapped. Well, look where we are," Jason said mockingly, circling her like a predator stalking its prey. "You should have just cooperated. This didn't have to happen." "I didn't do anything," Emily protested, her voice trembling but firm. She fought to keep her composure despite the panic rising inside her. "You know I didn't do anything wrong." Jason paused, leaning in close so their faces were only inches apart. "You think I care? Do you really think anyone here cares about what you did or didn't do?" Emily stared at him, horrified by the coldness in his eyes. It was as if he took pleasure in her fear, feeding off her helplessness. He straightened up, his smirk widening. "You're going to have to play along if you want to make it out of here, sweetheart," he continued, pacing back and forth in front of her. "Because as far as we're concerned, you're a threat to national security." "What?" Emily blinked in disbelief. "National security? That's ridiculous." Jason stopped pacing, his expression turning dark. "Ridiculous, huh? You think we're joking around here? You've been classified as a potential terrorist. You were resisting arrest, acting suspiciously. Who knows what you're capable of?" Emily's mind reeled. This couldn't be real. Terrorism. This was beyond a fabricated charge. It was an outright lie, a way to justify their brutality. Her breath quickened as she realized just how dangerous the situation had become. "You can't just make things up," Emily whispered, her voice shaking. Jason laughed, the sound cold and empty. "Oh, we can. And we do. You'll find that we're very good at making things disappear." Before Emily could respond, the door opened, and two more officers entered the room, looking at Jason expectantly, awaiting his command. "Take her to holding," Jason ordered, his voice casual, as if he were asking them to deliver a package instead of a human being. "Make sure she's comfortable." The other officers grabbed Emily by the arms, yanking her up from the chair. Her body screamed in protest. Her muscles were sore from the earlier beating. They dragged her down a dimly lit hallway toward a series of cells at the back of the station. The smell of sweat and fear clung to the air, thick and suffocating. They shoved her into a small, filthy cell, slamming the heavy metal door behind her. The room was cold, the concrete walls bare and unforgiving. Emily stumbled to the floor, her legs giving out beneath her as the weight of her situation finally crashed down on her. She had never felt so powerless, so trapped. Hours turned into days, and the passage of time blurred as Emily remained locked in the dark, silent cell. Every few hours, the officers would drag her out for another round of questioning, but it was never really about the questions. It was about breaking her down physically and mentally. The officers who dragged her from her cell each time were the same. Their expressions were always cold and indifferent, as if she were just another piece of machinery in the oppressive system they upheld. They didn't look at her as a person with feelings, hopes, and dreams, but as an object to be manipulated, a target for their power games. Jason, in particular, relished in her suffering. His twisted sense of authority fed off her pain, and the fear in her eyes seemed to only fuel this sadistic pleasure. Each time she was pulled from her cell, the routine was the same. They would shove her into the interrogation room, and Jason would lean in close, taunting her with threats and fabricated accusations. The psychological torment he inflicted was relentless, designed to break her spirit. "You're going to be here for a while, sweetheart," he would say, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "You'd better start talking, or things are going to get a lot worse for you." Emily would sit in silence, her heart pounding in her chest. No matter how hard he pressed, she refused to give in to his demands. She was innocent. She knew that deep down, and she clung to that truth like a lifeline. Yet the longer she stayed locked up, the more she feared that the truth wouldn't matter to them. They had their narrative, and it seemed they would stop at nothing to make her fit into it. As the days dragged on, Emily's hope began to fade. Her body was growing weaker, and the stress of her situation was taking a toll on her mental health. She could feel the walls of the cell closing in on her, suffocating her with despair. The isolation was unbearable, and the lack of human contact left her feeling like she was slipping into darkness. She longed for a familiar face, a voice to reassure her that she wasn't forgotten. Then one day, as she sat on the floor, her back against the cold concrete, she heard a commotion outside her cell. The clattering of feet and muffled voices echoed down the hallway. Emily's heart raced. Perhaps this time it was someone coming to help her. She pressed her ear against the cold metal door, straining to hear. "You can't just treat people like this. She deserves to be treated with respect." A woman's voice echoed through the corridor. The sound was like a breath of fresh air in her suffocating prison. Jason's voice cut through, harsh and dismissive. "You don't know what you're talking about. She's a criminal, and criminals don't deserve respect." The woman's voice remained steady, filled with determination. "No, what you're doing is criminal. You're abusing your power, and I won't stand by and let it happen. She hasn't been charged with anything, and you can't just keep her here without due process." Emily's heart soared at the sound of the woman's voice. Could it be someone from her father's department? Maybe they had come to find her, to rescue her from this nightmare. But Jason's harsh laughter quickly dashed her hopes. "Due process? Spare me. We have our ways of dealing with trash like her. You should know better than to meddle in police business." The woman's response was filled with righteous anger. "You're making a mistake. I will report you. This isn't over." The sound of footsteps faded, and Emily was left alone once more. But hope flickered within her like a candle in the dark. Someone was fighting for her. It was a small spark, but it was enough to reignite her will to endure. Days passed, and Emily clung to that flicker of hope. She imagined the woman, whoever she was, working tirelessly to expose the injustice happening in that station. It was a balm to her weary soul. But as each day blurred into the next, the mental toll began to wear her down. On one particularly bleak day, Emily was summoned again to the interrogation room. Jason was waiting for her, leaning casually against the wall, a smug look on his face. "Guess what? We have a special guest for you today," he said with a mocking lilt in his voice. Before Emily could respond, the door swung open, and in walked the woman from before. Emily's heart raced. She looked familiar, strong, determined, and fierce. It was as if a part of her had been waiting for this moment. "Emily, is it?" the woman asked, her voice warm and reassuring. "I'm here to help you." Emily nodded, tears of relief pooling in her eyes. "Thank you for coming." Jason stepped forward, his expression darkening. "This is police business, ma'am. You need to leave." The woman stood her ground, her eyes flashing with defiance. "I won't leave until Emily is released. You have no right to keep her here." "Watch your tone, or you'll be joining her in the cell," Jason sneered, but his bravado wavered slightly as he realized that the woman wouldn't back down. "I'll gladly take my chances," she replied firmly, crossing her arms over her chest. "You're breaking the law, and I have every intention of reporting you for it." Emily watched the exchange, her heart swelling with hope. This woman was a force of nature, and she could feel her own resolve strengthening in response. Jason's smirk faltered as the atmosphere in the room shifted. He hadn't expected someone to challenge him so openly, and it unnerved him. "Let's make this easy," Jason said, trying to regain control. "You don't want to make a scene. Just go about your business and leave her to us." The woman shook her head. "No, this isn't just about business. This is about justice, and Emily deserves a chance to explain her side of the story." Jason scoffed. "And why would we believe her? She's just a suspect, nothing more." "Because she's innocent," the woman replied, her voice unwavering. "And the truth will come out. You can't hide behind your badge forever." Emily felt a surge of pride. This woman wasn't just advocating for her. She was challenging the very foundations of the injustice that had imprisoned her. In that moment, Emily knew she wasn't alone anymore. "Let her go," the woman continued, her tone firm. "You have no legitimate reason to hold her here. I'm willing to take this to the media, and trust me, the public will want to know about your actions." Jason's expression darkened, and Emily could see the anger boiling beneath the surface. He glanced at the woman with a mix of disdain and fury. "You think you can just waltz in here and demand whatever you want? This is not how things work." "Oh, I think you'll find that people are getting tired of how things work around here." The woman shot back, her eyes blazing. "And it's time for a change." The confrontation between them seemed to electrify the air, filling the room with a tension that was almost palpable. Emily could hardly breathe, but she was filled with hope. "Emily," the woman said, turning her attention back to her. "Can you tell me what happened?" Taking a deep breath, Emily began to recount her story, the pain and humiliation spilling out in a rush. "I was just walking home, and he stopped me for no reason. I tried to politely decline to talk to him, and then—" Her voice faltered as she recalled the moment he had hit her. The woman listened intently, her expression unwavering. "You did nothing wrong," she assured Emily. "And we're going to make sure that everyone knows it." As Emily spoke, Jason's demeanor shifted. He was no longer the imposing figure he had tried to present. The confidence that had fueled his aggression was slowly eroding, and for the first time, he appeared vulnerable. The truth of Emily's story was hanging in the air, and it was becoming increasingly difficult for him to maintain his facade. "Enough of this," Jason said, his voice rising in frustration. "You need to leave now before I have you removed." But the woman remained steadfast. "You can't intimidate me, Jason. You're not above the law, and I will make sure that this gets reported. The public deserves to know what's happening in this department." With that, the tension in the room reached a boiling point. Emily could feel the momentum shifting. The weight of her suffering was no longer a burden she had to carry alone. The woman's unwavering spirit was a light in the darkness, a beacon of hope that promised change. "Let's go, Emily," the woman said, extending her hand toward her. "It's time to reclaim your life." As Emily took her hand, a sense of empowerment surged through her. She was ready to fight back, to stand up for herself and all those who had been victimized. No longer would she let fear dictate her life. This was just the beginning of her journey, a journey that would lead to justice and healing. The door swung open, and as they stepped out of the interrogation room, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was not just a victim. She was a survivor, and she would not be. The fight for justice. As Emily stepped out of the interrogation room, her heart raced with a mixture of fear and hope. The dim, oppressive air of the police station seemed to lift slightly, the harsh fluorescent lights now feeling less like a spotlight on her shame and more like a guiding force toward freedom. With the woman, whose name she had learned was Maya, by her side, Emily felt emboldened. Maya led her down the bustling hallway of the station, past officers who cast curious glances in their direction. It was clear that the tension of the previous moments hung in the air, an unspoken acknowledgement of the confrontation that had just occurred. Jason's attempts to maintain control were faltering, and Emily sensed a shift in the atmosphere, a growing awareness among the officers of the injustice that was unfolding. "Stay close to me," Maya whispered as they reached the entrance of the station. "We're going to get you out of here." Emily nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt a rush of gratitude toward Maya, a woman who had stepped into her life at the darkest moment and was now determined to help her reclaim her dignity. Just as they reached the exit, however, Jason appeared in their path, his expression a mask of anger and defiance. "You think you can just waltz out of here?" he snapped, blocking their way. His eyes were cold, filled with a mix of frustration and rage at having his authority challenged. "You're not going anywhere until this situation is resolved." Maya stood firm, her shoulders squared as she faced him. "You don't have the right to hold her here, Jason. You've violated her rights, and I will see to it that this is reported. You're not above the law." "Enough with the theatrics," Jason retorted, his voice dripping with disdain. "You're just a civilian. You don't understand how this works." Emily's pulse quickened as she watched the confrontation unfold. It was as if a dam had broken, and Maya's courage was the flood that threatened to wash away the facade of power Jason had relied on. "This isn't about your authority, Jason. This is about Emily's rights. You can't just hit someone and expect there to be no consequences." He stepped closer, his expression darkening. "You think you're going to get away with this? You're just making it worse for her." With her heart pounding, Emily felt a surge of determination. She wouldn't let Jason intimidate her any longer. "You can't scare me into submission," she said, her voice steady. "I have the right to stand up for myself, and I will not be silent." The standoff in the doorway drew the attention of several officers passing by, their expressions revealing a mix of concern and curiosity. Emily noticed a few whispering to one another, and for the first time, she felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps they were beginning to see through Jason's manipulation, to recognize that his actions had crossed a line. Maya took a step forward, addressing the gathering crowd of officers. "This is a violation of protocol. You all know it. We can't let this kind of behavior continue unchecked. We have a responsibility to uphold justice, not perpetuate injustice." Jason's bravado began to crack. The once confident smirk faded, replaced by a defensive posture. He realized he was losing control, and with it, his authority. "You're overstepping your bounds, Maya. You have no idea what you're getting into." But Maya stood her ground. "No, Jason, you're the one who doesn't understand. This isn't just about you and me. It's about every person who has suffered under the weight of your badge. You've created a culture of fear, and that ends now." With every word, Emily felt her own resolve strengthening. This was not just about her anymore. It was about confronting a system that had allowed Jason's behavior to go unchecked for too long. She was no longer a victim. She was a part of a movement toward accountability and justice. The tension in the air shifted again as more officers began to gather, their expressions revealing an unease that had been missing before. Emily saw a few nodding in agreement, and her heart surged with hope. Perhaps change was possible. "Enough," Jason finally barked, trying to regain control. "This is not a place for theatrics. You'll both regret this." "Regret what?" Maya challenged, her voice unwavering. "Standing up for what's right. You may think you're untouchable, but the truth always comes to light." The moment hung in the air, charged with the weight of their words. Emily looked around at the officers gathered, searching for any sign of support. She saw a few nodding, and for the first time, she felt a flicker of hope that they were willing to stand with her against injustice. "Let her go, Jason," one officer finally spoke up, stepping forward. His tone was steady, and the authority in his voice was palpable. "We need to follow the proper procedures. This isn't how we operate." Jason's face turned a shade paler, the reality of the situation dawning on him. He was no longer in control, and the moment of truth had arrived. "You can't just let her walk away," he shouted, but the protests began to fade in the face of the collective resolve surrounding him. The officer who had spoken stepped closer to Emily and Maya, offering a reassuring nod. "We'll handle this properly. No more games." With the weight of the moment behind her, Emily felt a rush of gratitude wash over her. She wasn't alone anymore. She had allies, people who believed in her and were willing to fight against the tyranny of a corrupt system. "Thank you," Emily said softly, her voice filled with emotion. She looked at Maya, who smiled back at her, a glimmer of pride in her eyes. They had stood up against oppression, and together, they would continue to fight. As Jason's facade crumbled, he realized he was outnumbered. With a final glare, he stepped back, the fight leaving him. "This isn't over," he muttered, retreating toward the back of the station, leaving the door open for Emily and Maya to step into the light. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the surge of empowerment. The door that had once felt like a prison now opened to freedom and hope. As she walked past the officers who had gathered, she felt their support, a palpable shift in the atmosphere as they began to understand the power of standing up against injustice. The path ahead was still uncertain, but she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. With Maya by her side and the support of those around her, Emily knew she was no longer just a victim. She was a warrior for justice, and this was just the beginning of her journey. Unveiling the truth. As Emily and Maya stepped outside the police station, the cool evening air enveloped them like a comforting embrace. The sun had set, casting a warm glow over the city, and Emily took a moment to breathe deeply, savoring the taste of freedom after the suffocating confines of the interrogation room. "Are you okay?" Maya asked, her eyes scanning Emily's face for signs of distress. "I will be," Emily replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I just need to process everything that's happened." Maya nodded, her expression empathetic. "It's going to take time, but we'll make sure you're safe. You have a lot of people on your side now, and we're not going to let Jason get away with this." As they walked away from the station, Emily's mind raced with thoughts of her father, Chief Robert Carter. He had dedicated his life to law enforcement, fighting against injustice, and now he was probably worried sick about her. The thought made her heart ache. She needed to reach out to him, to let him know she was okay, and to share the truth of what had happened. "Do you have a phone?" Maya asked, breaking into her thoughts. "Yes, it's in my bag," Emily replied, her heart racing at the thought of calling her father. "I think I left it at the station when they brought me in." "Let's go back and get it," Maya suggested. "You need to contact him, and I'll help you get in touch with someone who can make sure Jason is held accountable for what he's done." With renewed determination, they headed back toward the station. The city streets felt different now, buzzing with life and possibility. Emily no longer felt like a victim. She felt empowered by the support she had found and the strength she had discovered within herself. As they arrived back at the station, Emily noticed the tension in the air was still palpable, but now it was laced with a sense of purpose. She could see officers milling about, some engaged in quiet conversations, others casting wary glances in her direction. It seemed the word had spread about the confrontation, and Emily felt a mix of anxiety and determination. Maya approached the front desk, her voice confident. "Excuse me, I need to retrieve a personal item for Emily Carter. Her phone was left here during the incident." The officer at the desk glanced up, surprise flickering across his face. "Let me check the records." "One moment, please." As he turned to consult the logbook, Emily felt her heart pound in her chest. This was it. She was about to reclaim a piece of her life, a connection to the outside world. The officer returned, a hesitant expression on his face. "It seems your phone is indeed here, but I need to confirm your identity before I can release it," he said. Emily nodded, unveiling the truth. As Emily and Maya stepped outside the police station, the cool evening air enveloped them like a comforting embrace. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow over the city. Emily took a moment to breathe deeply, savoring the taste of freedom after the suffocating confines of the interrogation room. The sounds of the bustling city felt invigorating, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence she had endured for days. "Are you okay?" Maya asked, her eyes scanning Emily's face for any signs of distress. "I will be," Emily replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I just need to process everything that's happened." The events of the past few days had been a whirlwind of fear, pain, and confusion, and she knew that the road ahead would not be easy. Maya nodded, her expression empathetic. "It's going to take time, but we'll make sure you're safe. You have a lot of people on your side now, and we're not going to let Jason get away with this." As they walked away from the station, Emily's mind raced with thoughts of her father, Chief Robert Carter. He had dedicated his life to law enforcement, fighting against injustice and serving the community. The thought of him worrying about her made her heart ache. She needed to reach out to him, to let him know she was okay, and to share the truth of what had happened. "Do you have a phone?" Maya asked, breaking into her thoughts. "Yes, it's in my bag," Emily replied, her heart racing at the thought of calling her father. "I think I left it at the station when they brought me in." "Let's go back and get it," Maya suggested. "You need to contact him, and I'll help you get in touch with someone who can ensure Jason is held accountable for what he's done." With renewed determination, they headed back toward the station. As they walked, Emily felt the weight of the world lifting off her shoulders. The streets felt different now, buzzing with life and possibility. She was no longer a victim. She was empowered by the support she had found and the strength she had discovered within herself. As they approached the station, a sense of anxiety began to creep in. What if Jason was still there? What if he tried to intimidate her again? But Emily pushed those thoughts aside. She was ready to reclaim her life. Upon entering the station, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Officers milled about, engaged in hushed conversations, casting wary glances at Emily and Maya as they walked in. It seemed that word of the confrontation had spread, and Emily felt a mix of trepidation and resolve. She was no longer just a victim. She was now a part of a larger narrative, a fight against injustice. Maya approached the front desk, her voice firm. "Excuse me, I need to retrieve a personal item for Emily Carter. Her phone was left here during the incident." The officer at the desk looked up, surprise flickering across his face. Let me check the records." "One moment, please." He turned to consult the logbook, and Emily felt her heart pound in her chest. This was it. She was about to reclaim a piece of her life, a connection to the outside world. As the officer scrolled through the pages, Maya glanced over at Emily, her expression reassuring. "You're doing great. Just remember, you're not alone in this. We'll get through it together." The officer returned, his demeanor slightly more subdued. "It seems your phone is indeed here, but I need to confirm your identity before I can release it," he said, looking slightly apologetic. Emily nodded, her heart racing with the thought of speaking to her father. "Of course. I have my ID in my bag. Just a moment." She reached into her purse and pulled out her identification, handing it to the officer. As he examined it, the atmosphere around them shifted. A couple of other officers nearby were whispering, their gazes fixed on Emily with a mix of curiosity and concern. "Thank you," the officer said as he handed back her ID and motioned for her to follow him. "I'll get your phone for you." They walked down the hallway, and Emily could feel the eyes of the officers on her. Some looked sympathetic, while others seemed indifferent, But she held her head high. She was no longer going to let fear dictate her life. She had stood up for herself once, and she would continue to do so. After a brief moment, the officer returned with her phone. "Here you go," he said, handing it to her. "I'm sorry for the trouble you've been through." "Thank you," Emily replied, her voice steady. As she took her phone, she felt a rush of relief wash over her. This small piece of technology represented a connection to the outside world, a bridge to her father, and a step toward reclaiming her life. Maya stood beside her, watching as Emily unlocked her phone and scanned through her contacts for her father's number. Her hands trembled slightly, but she steadied herself. She needed to do this. "Okay, I'm going to call him," Emily said, her voice resolute. Maya nodded, her expression filled with encouragement. "You've got this. He'll want to know you're safe." With a deep breath, Emily pressed the call button. The phone rang, and with each beep, her heart raced faster. She could picture her father in his office, deep in thought, probably worried sick. "Come on, Dad, pick up," she whispered under her breath, anxiety knotting in her stomach. Finally, the line connected. "Emily, is that you?" Her father's voice came through, filled with concern. "Dad, I'm here," she exclaimed, relief flooding her voice. "I'm okay. I'm at the police station, but I need you to listen to me." "What happened? Are you safe?" he asked, his tone instantly shifting to urgency. "I'm safe now, but I need to explain everything. I was arrested by Officer Jason Mitchell. He hit me for no reason, and he's been treating me like a criminal ever since," Emily said, her voice trembling with the weight of her experiences. There was a moment of silence on the other end, and Emily could hear her father's sharp intake of breath. "What? Emily, I'm on my way. Just stay where you are. I'll be there as soon as I can." "Dad, I need you to be careful," she urged, knowing the potential danger of confronting Jason and his colleagues. "He's not going to let this go easily." "I'll handle it," he said firmly. "Just keep your phone on and stay with Maya. She's there with you." "Yes, she is," Emily replied, grateful for Maya's unwavering support. "Thank you for coming, Dad. I love you." "I love you too, Emily. Hang in there. I'll be there soon." As the call ended, Emily felt a surge of hope. She wasn't alone in this fight anymore. Her father, the chief of police, was coming to stand by her side, and together they would confront the injustice she had faced. Maya placed a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder. "You did great. Your dad will help, and we'll make sure Jason is held accountable." Emily nodded, feeling a renewed sense of determination. "I won't let him get away with this. We have to fight back." As they waited for her father's arrival, Emily and Maya sat in a nearby waiting area. The fluorescent lights above flickered intermittently, casting an uncomfortable glow. Emily's heart was still racing from the adrenaline of her call, but now it was mixed with a sense of purpose. "Do you have any idea what you want to do next?" Maya asked, breaking the silence. Emily thought for a moment. "I want to make sure that what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else. If I have to go public, I will. People need to know what Jason did." Maya smiled, her eyes shining with admiration. "That's the spirit. You have a powerful voice, and it deserves to be heard. We can gather support from the community, talk to local activists, and even reach out to media outlets." Emily felt a surge of excitement at the possibilities. "Yes, we need to create a movement to hold officers accountable for their actions. No one should have to go through what I did." As they brainstormed ideas, Emily felt the weight of her experiences beginning to lift. The darkness that had clouded her mind was slowly dissipating, replaced by a growing sense of purpose. She was ready to fight for justice, not just for herself, but for others who had been victimized by the very system meant to protect them. The minutes passed slowly, but Emily felt a sense of anticipation building inside her. She was no longer just a passive victim. She was becoming an active participant in her own story, and she was determined to write a new chapter, one where the truth prevailed and justice was served. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, The front doors of the station swung open, and Chief Robert Carter stepped inside, his presence commanding immediate attention. His eyes searched the room until they landed on Emily. Relief washed over his face as he rushed toward her, pulling her into a tight embrace. "Emily," he exclaimed, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank God you're safe." "I'm okay, Dad," she reassured him, feeling the warmth of his protective embrace. "But I need to tell you everything." "I know," he replied, his voice steady as he pulled back to look her in the eye. "I've already heard some of confronting the darkness." Emily's heart swelled with relief as her father, Chief Robert Carter, pulled back from their embrace, his expression filled with concern and determination. She could see the weight of her ordeal etched into his features, the lines of worry deepening around his eyes. This was not just her fight anymore. It was a family affair, a battle against the very system he had dedicated his life to uphold. "I've been hearing some disturbing things," Robert said, his voice steady yet firm. "You need to tell me exactly what happened, from the beginning." Taking a deep breath, Emily nodded, grateful for the chance to share her story with someone who cared deeply for her well-being. She glanced over at Maya, who gave her an encouraging nod, and then began recounting the events leading up to her arrest. "It started when I was just walking home. Officer Jason approached me and tried to strike up a conversation. I politely declined, and that's when things took a turn for the worse," Emily said, her voice trembling slightly as she recalled the anger in Jason's eyes, the sensation of his slap still fresh in her memory. "He got angry when I refused to talk to him and hit me. I couldn't believe it was happening. I was just trying to go about my day." Robert's expression hardened as he listened, his fists clenching at his sides. "This is unacceptable. No officer should ever lay a hand on a civilian, especially without cause, and to use his authority to intimidate you." He shook his head in disbelief, fury bubbling just beneath the surface. "I'll make sure he's held accountable for his actions." Emily continued, sharing the details of the brutal interrogation, the pain of being treated like a criminal for simply existing in her own skin. "They dragged me into a room, and Jason just kept coming at me with these absurd accusations. He twisted the truth, calling me a terrorist when all I did was try to walk home." Her father's jaw tightened, and she could see the fire of determination igniting within him. "We're going to expose this, Emily. I promise you. We're going to make sure the truth is heard, and those responsible are held accountable." "I want to do more than just expose him," Emily replied, her voice gaining strength. "I want to start a movement. No one should ever have to go through what I did. We need to raise awareness about police brutality and fight for accountability." Robert nodded, pride washing over his features. "That's the spirit. You've already inspired me, Emily. Together, we'll make sure your story gets the attention it deserves." Just then, Maya interjected, her voice filled with urgency. "If we're going to do this, we need to act fast. The longer we wait, the more they might try to cover it up. We can start by reaching out to local activists and community leaders who will stand with us." "I know a few people who are passionate about these issues," Robert said, glancing at Maya. "I can get them involved, but we need to have a clear plan. We can't just go in guns blazing. We need to strategize." "Let's gather all the evidence we have," Emily suggested. "We need to document everything. My injuries, the lack of proper procedures, Jason's behavior. We'll compile it into a report to present to the media and the community." With renewed determination, they began to brainstorm their next steps. Emily felt a sense of purpose settle over her, a fire igniting in her belly. She was no longer a passive victim of circumstance. She was becoming an agent of change. As they discussed their plan, Robert's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression shifting to one of concern. "It's Officer Daniels. He's been in touch with some of the other officers at the station about Jason." Emily felt a wave of apprehension wash over her. "What's going on?" Robert answered the call, his voice steady. "Daniels, what do you have for me?" "Chief, "We've been keeping an eye on the situation," Daniels replied. "Jason is trying to push a narrative that Emily was belligerent and resisting arrest. He's already made statements to that effect, and he's working to discredit her." Emily's heart sank. She knew that Jason would try to spin the story, to protect himself at all costs. "They're going to try to paint me as the villain," she said, dread creeping into her voice. "That's why we need to act fast," Robert said, his tone sharp. "Gather everyone who can testify to what happened. We need witnesses, anyone who saw the altercation or can speak to Jason's behavior. We can't let him control the narrative." Maya leaned closer to Emily, her eyes bright with resolve. "I can reach out to my contacts in the community and start gathering support. There are local advocacy groups that would jump at the chance to help." Robert ended the call and turned to them, his expression fierce. "Let's get to work. We're going to take this to the public. Emily, we'll make sure your voice is heard." As they began to formulate their plan, a sense of urgency propelled them forward. Maya pulled out her phone and started making calls, while Robert contacted local leaders who had a reputation for fighting against police brutality and systemic injustice. Emily sat back, her heart pounding with a mix of anxiety and excitement. She had always been passionate about social justice issues, but now she was in the thick of it, ready to fight for herself and others. The fear that had once paralyzed her was transforming into fierce determination. In the days that followed, the momentum grew. Maya organized a meeting with local activists who were eager to lend their voices to Emily's cause. They met in a community center, the air buzzing with energy and purpose. The walls were adorned with posters advocating for change, and the room was filled with individuals from all walks of life, united by a common goal. As Emily entered the room, she felt a sense of belonging wash over her. These were people who understood her struggles, who had faced similar injustices, and who were ready to stand with her. She took a deep breath, ready to share her story. "I'm grateful for everyone being here today," she began, her voice steady. "I never imagined I would find myself in this position, but I refuse to let fear dictate my life any longer. What happened to me is not just my story. It's a reflection of a larger problem within our society." The room erupted with applause, and Emily felt her heart swell. She continued, detailing her experience with Jason and the assault she had endured. As she spoke, she could see the empathy in the eyes of those listening, their expressions shifting from concern to determination. "We need to ensure that the voices of victims are heard," Maya added, stepping up beside Emily. "It's time for accountability, and we must demand justice for Emily and for all those who have suffered in silence." The activists nodded, and conversations erupted around the room as ideas began to flow. They discussed plans for protests, petitions, and outreach campaigns to raise awareness about police brutality and the need for systemic change. In the midst of the discussions, one of the activists stood up, her voice ringing clear. "We have to take this to the streets. We need a rally to draw attention to this issue and demand justice for Emily. We can't allow this to be swept under the rug." The crowd erupted with approval, and Emily felt a rush of excitement. "Yes, let's organize a rally and invite the media. We need to make sure our message reaches as many people as possible." As they strategized and assigned roles, Emily's spirits soared. She was no longer trapped in a cycle of fear and despair. She was part of a movement, a collective force for change. In the days leading up to the rally, Emily and Maya worked tirelessly, gathering support from local organizations, reaching out to the media, and spreading the word through social media platforms. The community began to rally around Emily, and she could feel the swell of support growing. On the day of the rally, Emily stood at the front of the crowd, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and nerves. The atmosphere was electric, filled with chants for justice and signs advocating for change. She could see her father standing nearby, his presence a steady anchor as he watched her with pride. As she stepped up to the microphone, Emily took a deep breath, her voice steady and strong. "Thank you all for being here today. What happened to me was not an isolated incident. It's a reflection of a system that allows injustice to flourish. We are here to demand accountability and to fight for every person who has been victimized by police brutality." The crowd erupted into cheers, and the energy in the air surged as Emily spoke from her heart. She shared her story, the pain she had endured, and the hope she now felt standing alongside so many allies. "I refuse to be silent any longer," she declared, her voice ringing out. "We will not back down until justice is served. We will stand together, united, and we will make a difference." As the crowd erupted in applause, Emily felt a profound sense of purpose wash over her. She was no longer just a victim. She was a warrior for justice, leading a movement that would not be silenced. The power of their collected voices echoed through the streets, a promise that change was coming, and that they would not rest until every person was treated with dignity and respect. In that moment, as she looked out at the sea of faces united in their fight, Emily knew that this was only the beginning. She had turned her pain into purpose, and together they would continue to challenge the darkness and fight for a brighter, a new dawn. The rally was a resounding success, and as Emily stepped down from the makeshift stage, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment wash over her. The cheers and chants of the crowd still echoed in her ears, a testament to the strength of their collective voice. Activists, friends, and strangers alike had come together, united in their demand for justice. The atmosphere was charged with hope, and for the first time in days, Emily felt truly free. As the crowd began to disperse, many approached Emily to share their stories, offering words of encouragement and solidarity. She listened intently, each account further fueling her determination. There were mothers, fathers, siblings, and friends. All of them had faced their own battles against a system that often seemed rigged against them. Each story was a thread in the tapestry of resilience they were weaving together. Maya stood beside her, a proud smile on her face. "You did it, Emily. Your voice is powerful. You've inspired so many people today. I couldn't have done it without you," Emily replied, gratitude spilling from her heart. "You stood up for me when I felt so lost. I don't think I can ever thank you enough." "You don't have to. Just keep fighting," Maya said, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "This is just the beginning. We need to keep the momentum going." As they began to gather their things, Emily spotted her father across the crowd, talking to some of the other activists. His presence felt like a solid rock in the sea of chaos that had become her life. He had always been her protector, and now, seeing him engage with others who shared their vision for justice filled her with pride. "Dad," she called out, waving him over. He made his way through the crowd, a look of admiration on his face. "You were incredible, Emily," he said, pulling her into a tight embrace. "I'm so proud of you for standing up and sharing your story. It takes tremendous courage." "Thank you, Dad. It means a lot to have your support," she replied, her voice slightly muffled in his shoulder. "I just want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." "We will," he promised, stepping back to look her in the eyes. "I'm going to launch an internal investigation into Jason and his unit. They need to be held accountable for what they did to you, and we need to ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Emily felt a rush of hope. "Do you think they'll take it seriously?" "I won't stop pushing until they do," Robert replied, his tone firm. "You've sparked something today, Emily. The community is behind you, and I'll make sure that your voice is amplified." As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the city, Emily took a moment to soak it all in. The day had been filled with so much energy, so many emotions, and the realization of the fight ahead. But she also felt the thrill of potential change coursing through her veins. They were going to make a difference. In the days that followed, the momentum continued to build. Emily, Maya, and the other activists organized follow-up meetings to strategize their next steps. They gathered support from local organizations, educated the community about their rights, and began planning future rallies and events to raise awareness about police brutality and systemic racism. With her father's support, Emily's story gained traction in the media. News outlets began to pick up on the rally, and soon her experience was featured in articles and news segments across the city. Emily was careful to speak not just about her own story, but also to highlight the broader issues at play. She wanted to ensure that her fight was not just a solitary battle, but part of a larger movement for justice. As Emily stood before a crowd once more, this time at a town hall meeting organized by the activists, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The room was packed, filled with individuals eager to listen, learn, and stand in solidarity. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice steady. "We've seen what happens when we allow fear and silence to dictate our lives. Today, we are taking a stand against injustice. No one should be treated as I was. No one should live in fear of those who are supposed to protect us." The audience erupted in applause, and Emily could feel the energy surging through the room. We need to hold our law enforcement accountable. We need to demand transparency and reform. Together, we can create a community where everyone feels safe and respected. Maya stood nearby, capturing the moment on her phone, ready to share it with the world. Emily's words echoed through the room, resonating with every person present. They were no longer just voices in the dark. They were a chorus for change. As the meeting continued, Emily opened the floor for questions, allowing the community to engage and express their concerns. Each voice was a reminder of the shared struggle they faced, and with every question, she felt more connected to those around her. "What can we do to support you?" one woman asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "Join us," Emily replied, her eyes shining with determination. "We need more voices. We need to raise awareness about these issues and work together to hold our leaders accountable. Write letters, organize meetings, and share your stories. Every action matters." Another person raised their hand, speaking up. "What about the police? How can we work with them to ensure our safety?" "That's a crucial question," Robert interjected, stepping forward. "Change needs to come from both sides. It's vital that we establish a dialogue with our police department. We need to ensure that officers are trained to respect and protect everyone in our community, regardless of their background." The conversation flowed, with ideas sparking new discussions about community engagement, reform, and education. Emily felt a wave of optimism wash over her. They were creating something powerful together, a movement fueled by shared experiences and a collective desire for change. As the meeting came to a close, Emily glanced around the room, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. They had built a community of support, a network of individuals who were willing to stand together in the face of injustice. With her father by her side and Maya's unwavering support, she felt equipped to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. In the weeks that followed, Emily's story continued to gain traction. The investigation into Jason's actions began to unfold, and community leaders rallied behind her, demanding accountability from the police department. Local news outlets featured her story, amplifying her voice and the voices of others who had faced similar injustices. But Emily knew the fight wasn't over. There were still battles to be fought, still work to be done. She continued to meet with community leaders, organizing workshops to educate people about their rights and how to advocate for themselves. One day, as she was preparing for another event, her father approached her in the living room. "Emily, I'm so proud of everything you've accomplished," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "You've shown incredible strength and courage." "Thank you, Dad," Emily replied, her heart swelling with pride. "But I couldn't have done this without your support. You've always taught me to stand up for what's right, and now I feel like I'm doing just that." Robert nodded, a look of determination crossing his face. "And I'll continue to support you every step of the way. Together, we'll make sure that no one else has to go through what you did." As they stood together, a sense of hope enveloped them. Emily realized that while the journey had been filled with pain and heartache, it had also brought her closer to her community and her father. The bonds they had forged in the fight for justice were unbreakable. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Emily became a prominent advocate for change in her community. Her voice echoed through the halls of local government, her presence a powerful reminder of the strength that comes from standing up against injustice. The rallying cry for accountability became louder, drawing in more supporters each day. Emily felt a sense of fulfillment as she looked around at the people who had joined her in this fight. They were no longer just individuals. They were a movement, a collective force pushing for change. Together, they were rewriting the narrative, challenging the status quo, and holding those in power accountable. On a crisp autumn morning, as the leaves turned golden and the air grew cooler, Emily stood in front of a crowd once again, ready to speak. This time, it was at a community celebration, honoring those who had fought for justice and reform in their town. As she addressed the crowd, she felt a surge of pride and purpose. Today, we celebrate not just what we have accomplished, but what we will continue to fight for, Emily said, her voice steady. We are a community that believes in justice, equality, and the right to be heard. Together, we are unstoppable. The crowd erupted in cheers, and as Emily looked out at the faces before her, she knew that this was just the beginning. The fight for justice was a journey, and while there would be challenges ahead, she was no longer alone. She had a community behind her, a movement dedicated to change, and a promise to herself to never give up. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the celebration, Emily felt a sense of hope for the future. Together, they would continue to challenge the darkness and fight for a brighter, more just world. For Emily, for every person who had been victimized, and for all those who believed that change was possible. She had turned her pain into purpose, and now they were ready to write the next chapter of their story together.